everybody! Welcome to another episode of Reacting Reddit, where real humans read, react, and summarize trending topics using comments on Reddit. And today, we're going to be talking about Star Trek, specifically two characters, Geordi and Data. For some context, let's look at the Wikipedia real quick, in case you don't know too much about Star Trek like me. So Geordi is a person born blind, and he sees through this visor. And at some point he gets like eyes later on. But basically what you need to understand about him is he was born blind and he sees things through a visor in a different way than other people, right? And then there's Data, and Data is an android. He is a complete robot that was grown and developed, so not only is he a robot, but he also is an artificial intelligence. These two things are kind of separate, right? He is both of them. And Data in Star Trek is basically the outsider opinion on humanity. You know, his role is to provide an outsider's perspective because he sees things in a different way. And so does Geordi. And so the interactions between these two characters are quite interesting because Geordi is blind and can't see, right? So to him, Data isn't that unhuman, because Geordi already sees things that differently. Whereas to most of the other characters, Data is a very unhuman, cold character from their perspective, right? They feel that way about him. Whereas Geordi is able to see him in a different light. And in some ways, both of these characters are the perspective characters. They're the characters that have an outsider perspective to the other characters, basically. And that plays into the story in multiple different ways, right? So now that you have some context over who Data and Geordi are, let's see what people have to say about them. This original thread was by Tweak0, and he says, Geordi literally sees Data differently. And we're gonna actually read this main post here as well, because the tool actually just looks at the title. The main post says, in Heart of Glory, we see what or how Geordi sees through his visor. I always thought it was interesting how immediately curious Picard was about it. But he mentions that Data has an aura about him, and Geordi, the engineer, says, of course, he's an android. I get the impression that Data wasn't well liked in Starfleet Academy and that Geordi was his first real friend. I wonder if Geordi was able to take to Data so much ease simpler because he literally does see him differently than most other people. People will tend to find Data unnatural and off-putting at first glance, whereas Geordi sees him as lit by an aura and maybe a bit more wonderful. All right, let's see what people have to say about that. Agnes VW says Geordi was in the unique position of being Data's doctor whenever something went wrong with him. Engineers probably don't expect that in their job description. Yeah, imagine you join a space fleet and you're an engineer, right? Well, obviously you're going to be working on the ship, you're going to be working on the nuclear reactor and maintaining all the weapon systems and life support and all that stuff. But then you find that you actually need to do surgery on an android robot. By the way, I mean, it's sci-fi. Come on, what are you expecting? Dano Indigo. I struggle with some of these usernames. Says, I hate we didn't really get to see Gene Roddenberry's Ides with those two. Ides or ideas? Not sure. Geordi and Data, I'm guessing it's ideas because there's multiple other typos in this post. Geordi and Data were going to be called the perceivers, since they both see everything in a different way than other people. Naked Marshall says, I have so many thoughts on this, but I'll try to be brief. Geordi would have seen them as they are while still having hope for them. He would have seen them as Picard does, but would have been more grounded and logical. I actually like PIC, or PIC. I have issues about it, as most of us do. The lack of Geordi really shows. He was Data's best friend, after all. McFlyUBojo says, sorry, this is off subject, but this post is making me think of other characters' points of view. I kind of wish Word had more of a long-term story arc having to do with the hot-headed nature of his tactical responses over the course of the show, instead of his consistent suggesting a crazy response and getting shut down. Perhaps Picard suggests studying historical leaders, or even better, recreating historical or even classic literary events in the holodeck. Perhaps we even see Picard acting as Worf's XO on board a classic ship from the 1700s or something. When all this starts happening, Word thinks it's all a waste of time, but eventually he sees the tactical significance of studying old scenarios and or coming up with solutions that don't involve aggressiveness. And by the end of the show's run, he is suggesting ideas that Picard hasn't even thought of. It always bummed me out that he originally wasn't meant to be a main character. Worf is a much more interesting character in Deep Space Nine. They get into stuff like that, and you find out more about why he is the way that he is. Deep Space Nine, as a whole, is a completely character-driven show, and that's why it is my favorite. That was by Lavender Quartz. Robot Love says Picard ended up becoming one of Worf's biggest advocates, though. I always enjoyed their relationship off the bridge. Picard was always ready to help out with the Klingon stuff at the drop of a hat. Gumpy the Great says, yeah, especially early on. Worf was basically just there to recommend a violent response, which Picard would shoot down to highlight how much of an open-minded diplomat he is, and B, to get his ass kicked to show, oh, this person is dangerous. He kicked our big warrior's ass. Well, they imply a few times that he is constantly in pain due to his birth's defects, which is pretty sad. So it is possible that he combats that with some sort of futuristic opiates. Do opiates need to be futuristic? I mean, opiates are pretty effective. I guess if they could get rid of all the negative stuff, then it would be futuristic. Blu-ray 78 says, Geordi is kind of socially awkward and loves engineering. Data, who happens to be an android, also loves engineering. Their common interests lead to a friendship. In my opinion, the best friendship on the show. As for other people's reactions, that made me think of Data's interaction with Bashir. Bashir also isn't put off, actually is fascinated. And it's interesting as he turns out to be a genetic engineer. Oh, he turns out to be genetically engineered. Going to the recurring theme of only different people can relate to each other. From My Fingers says, Geordi is kind of socially awkward and loves engineering. That reminds me of that one episode with the Enterprise D engine designer he recreated in the holodeck. Future So Bright says, LaForge, can we come in? Data says, please. They go through the inner room, and we see Data's reflection in a full-length mirror. He is sporting a beard like Reeker's. LaForge, did you damage your face, Data? That's a funny scene. Actually, Fire says the funniest part about this scene is that they deliberately hid Spiner from Burton and Sirtis beforehand. When they see him on camera, it's the actor's first time seeing him with a beard, and their reactions are genuine. Even Troy's hasty departure in a fit of giggles, that was improvised. Elim Garak 0010 says, I don't know if Geordi sees him any different philosophically speaking. It appears in many ways that he sees him philosophically no different than Dr. Pulaski. The only people that I think sees him differently are Tasha and Bashir. And even Tasha is a tad on the fence. My favorite Data moment is when he's on trial to see if he is property or not. And they asked him about Tasha, and he doesn't want to reveal their history because she specifically asked him not to. Even though he is literally on trial for his life, he wants to keep his promise to her. They take that ridiculous episode where everyone is drunk and turn it into a legitimately moving moment. Sigma Knight says it was always weird that TNG treated Data as something new, and all that he'd had 19 years of service in Starfleet, plus 4 years at the Academy. There's no way his previous captains and crew didn't also befriend Data or anything, especially with his constant awards given for his incredible service. Tweak Zero says, I always kind of assumed that Data was something of a dirty little secret in Starfleet before his tour on the Enterprise. He didn't seem to be very well known or lauded. He was more like a very well-operating machine that was begrudgingly and constantly promoted to the top. Even Captain Picard is fairly short with him in the beginning of the series. The defining factor may very well have been Geordi. He also probably has more freedom to explore his search for humanity at a higher rank. Tweak Zero says, I think Dana was specifically made to be less human after the failures of his predecessors. Data. He ironically, is that a thing? Why do people keep misspelling his name as Dana? Does he change his name to Dana when he gets more human or something? He ironically functions in human society better as a more separate entity. Considering his creator didn't much care for human society, it is an ironic commentary on it that he had to make something more mechanical and servile to be accepted among them. Is a warship come sailing says, it's a funny scene. They spend 2 or 3 minutes talking to Geordi about it before Riker points out, excuse me, Captain, I hate to break this up, but the unfinished sentence being, we're on a ship that could explode at any moment. And Picard is just like, oh, yes, of course. Proceed, number 1. Honey Badger, 1984, says, Geordi was an engineer and saw different spectrums other than visual, so he could appreciate the beauty of Data more than other people. When Geordi started replacing his visors with eyes, did he become limited to the visible spectrum? Or did he keep his ability to scan for radiation and other spectrums? I forget. Right or Else says, see, this is a problem I had with the Picard series. So much of it could have been Geordi's story rather than Picard's. Of course, the biggest problem with that series at all is sheer fucking hubris. It just bothered me that Data didn't even want to see Geordi before he died, or even ask Picard about him, write him a letter, something for his best friend. Jim the Wanderer says accusing Picard of hubris was kind of dumb, but totally on brand for a Starfleet admiral. The man single-handedly saved the Federation how many times? And he's asking for a small ship to conduct an investigation related to an attack that destroyed Utopia Planitia? Do a reverse reactivation clause and give him a new jacket and some cadets and a runabout, at the very least. Hell, give him Geordi. I can imagine he wouldn't jump at the chance to investigate his deadbeat best friend's potential progeny. Ooh, Floor Pie says, I always hated how they use stand-ins to film that scene where he looks at everybody, but they just appear in shadow with an aura around them. You can clearly tell it's not actually Jonathan Frakes or Brent Spinner. Well, Hysterical Realist says, I don't think that was the intention for the scene, but I saw Picard's reaction as somewhat similar to how people respond to me when they find out that I am colorblind. All of a sudden, everything becomes a test. People immediately want me to identify the colors of everything around me. Geordi's visor allows him to literally see other colors that unenhanced humans can't see. At least Picard had the advantage of being able to experience Geordi's vision for himself. Yet, the strength of Picard's curiosity in that moment led him to pretty much ignore the unfolding crisis in front of them until Geordi put him back on track. That particular interaction seems pulled directly from reality for those of us with alternative styles of vision. Zora Lord says, I am surprised how uneasy people of the late 24th century are with Data. You think enlightened humanity would treat him well. They treat him more as a commodity than a sentient individual. Rakasium says, sadly, it tracks. Prejudice isn't unknown. Look at Lieutenant I Hate Romulus from TOS, who turned on Spock. Or, hell, McCoy. And that's on the top of a lot of hideous situation involving artificial intelligences. From the ultimate computer to control, the TNG-era Federation is built on the corpses of a lot of dead artificial intelligence of various threat levels. Add to it the parallel fears of augments, and it's a toxic brew for anybody, even so-called enlightened groups, to turn ugly. Arctic Fury 129 says, the interesting thing about Data's various friendships is that he seems to be a better friend to people than most humans are to their own friends. It would probably be nicer to have Data as a friend than anyone else on the ship, because at the very least, Geordi knows that he won't be judged or made to feel self-conscious about his visor by Data. Tweak Zero replies, well, when you literally don't have emotions, it allows you a better shot at lawful neutrality. In the episode where Data is put on trial to see if he is property or not, he has a nice moment with Riker at the end where he lets him know he understands perfectly the difficult position Riker was put in and how much it hurt him to do that. Oh, that Jeremy says, maybe it's like how Neo could see the machine energy in the Matrix. Geordi sees Data as literally more than just an android. He sees the subtle ways he interacts with others in the environment. As an engineer, that would be something interesting to him. Field Marshal says Data is unnatural. He's literally a machine. He could have just been programmed instead of being put through the academy. Data is the property of Starfleet. All right, everybody. That's it for now. If you like this kind of content, please reach out, watch another video, check something, comment, like, or maybe even subscribe. And if you want to make content like this and you want to make thumbnails quickly and efficiently, well, again, reach out to us, get our email address from our About channel on this YouTube, our About page on this YouTube channel. Do the capture code, get our email, say hello, so we can set up a Zoom call to chat with you. We want to talk with more content creators. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Ciao!